We are stopping cold the attacks on Judeo-Christian values. And something I said so much during the last 2 years, but I'll say it again as we approach the end of the year. You know, we're getting near that beautiful Christmas season that people don't talk about anymore. They don't use the word Christmas because it's not politically correct. You go to department stores and they'll say Happy New Year and they'll say other things and it'll be red. They'll have it painted, but they don't say, well, guess what? We're saying Merry Christmas again.
It's Britney, bitch.
And Iraq, everywhere like such as.
I'm supposed to be the franchise player, and we're in here talking about practice.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
Out, Charlie! Out!
Our next door neighbors are foreign countries.
I call upon all nations to do everything they can to stop these terrorist killers. Thank you. Now watch this drive.
Hey everybody, and welcome to Remember Shuffle. My name is Ben. With me as always is my co-host Giordano.
Oh, hello, Benjamin.
Who told you my full name? Today we will be doing an episode that we've been thinking about for quite some time. We will be discussing the phenomenon of the war on Christmas, which is largely talking about right-wing cable news media. Would you say that's correct, Giordano?
That's where a lot of the existing discussion on the war on Christmas has been about how hysterical they are, but we do intend to add to the discussion by talking about the ACLU and their Bill Maher-ness. And in what ways was the war on Christmas actually real? We're going to do a both sides investigation here.
Yes, I love that.
But we'll see why the iteration that we had in the 2000s is actually the second iteration of a 300-year-long war on Christmas. Every year we talk about this. Ben is the Halloween guy, and I'm the Christmas guy.
I'm not a Halloween guy. I want that on the record.
And so I'm going to subject you to some kind of Christmas content every year, and this is your Christmas episode.
Nice. And once we finish discussing the 2000s, I am going to zoom out, and I'm going to tell you about the long history of Christmas, going all the way back to early modern European times. Giordano and I are trying something new, where instead of reading the same book, we read different books. So I read an academic book, a book that was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in History by Stephen Nissenbaum called The Battle for Christmas. And Giordano, what did you read to prepare for this episode?
I read John Gibson's The War on Christmas, how the liberal plot to ban the sacred Christian holiday is worse than you thought. I think we got accused on one of our episodes of cherry picking some kind of reading from someone who didn't have a lot of sway, but John Gibson was one of the biggest anchors on Fox News. He covered both the O.J. Simpson trial and the Lewinsky trial for NBC, and he was the fulcrum, apart from maybe Bill O'Reilly, of a lot of the war on Christmas public discourse that was going on in the 2000s. He led a program on Fox News called The Big Story, which was often pointed at the war on Christmas.
It was the biggest story of the 2000s. There was nothing bigger going on.
Yeah, as far as civil liberties goes, Christmas was basically the main thing happening. We're doing this too because this is the 20th anniversary of Bill O'Reilly nailing his 99 thesis to the church door, his declaration that Christmas was under siege, December 3rd, 2004. So almost 20 years to the day that this episode is being released. We're doing a lot of 2004 content recently, I noticed. World of Warcraft, Grand Theft Auto, the election. We are fully in the 20-year nostalgia cycle for 2004, which seems so nuts. It was weird enough when that was happening for the Y2K era, but now it's for 2004.
Yes. Time is relentless.
A mid-decade year. So Bill O'Reilly does this story that it's not politically correct to say Merry Christmas anymore. It's exclusionary to non-Christians. It is funny to see how hysterical these conservatives are about this imagined war on Christmas. They're envisioning a dystopian world in which if someone is careless enough to whistle Jingle Bells, they are immediately sent to the gulag.
Jingle Bells, a secular Christmas song with no mention of Christ, just winter and sleighs and bells.
I'm going to read a lot of passages from his book that outline the way that they see the world. And it's one in which any slip up can have you banned from society or or sent to Guantanamo Bay. The reality that they thought they were living in is very funny.
Yeah, and it's hilarious because this shit is still going on. It might not be as keyed up as it was in 2004, but I remember a few years ago when Tucker Carlson still had his program on Fox News, I believe an unhoused person doused the holiday tree in front of the Fox News building and lit it on fire, and Tucker Carlson called it a hate crime. Right? Instead of using the language of the war on Christmas, we're now using the language of racialized violence. They can't help but imagine themselves as the victim. They love it. It's part of the reactionary mind. That's why they love the "don't tread on me" signs. They're convinced that they are always being treaded upon, even if it is the lightest, most marginal little thing.
Yeah, where do these Christians get the sense of martyrdom? It's insane. So first we'll talk a little bit about the war on Christmas as it existed in 2004, where these anxieties were coming from, what the ACLU was doing, and what was going on with the American legal system to change the nature of how Christmas was being celebrated. And then we'll talk about how this is actually the second war on Christmas, that we have been changing what Christmas means for hundreds of years. And the version of Christmas that Bill O'Reilly and John Gibson are fighting for, or think they're fighting for, was actually created out of whole cloth in New York City, which I didn't know that Santa Claus is from New York, basically, in the 1800s, in order to mute some of the class conflict that was happening as people moved from the fields into the cities. They created Christmas literally to solve class conflict. And it's a very interesting story that we'll learn more about later in this episode. So just to give a little background on the war on Christmas, I should note that there have been a couple Supreme Court rulings on public displays of affection for the Yuletide. The first was in 1984, Lynch v. Donnelly, when the Supreme Court decided not to censure towns from displaying Christmas imagery, even the nativity scene, on municipal land. And then again in 1989, it decided in this case that the nativity scene should not be displayed on the steps of the courthouse, but that a menorah and Christmas tree could both be in front of the city council building, because Christmas in the Santa Claus, Christmas tree, jingle bells sense had become a secular holiday, but not necessarily the nativity scene. So we'll see this a lot as we move through the story, that there is a basis for removing the nativity scene from public spaces. And when I say public spaces, I mean like public schools, in front of town hall,
Courthouse.
This is where the majority of our conflicts are going to be taking place. And I think that that's fair because, one, you have a substitute. You have the reindeer and the sleigh and Santa Claus, and there's so much you can do with Christmas that isn't the nativity scene, which is explicitly religious. Either the government or the Constitution does have a establishment clause. It can't officially endorse any one specific religion. And so there is sort of this legal basis for not allowing public buildings to display a religious endorsement.
Yes. Some Bill Maher type will say, well, what about separation of church and state? Get your nativity scene out of here. And some right-winger reactionary, if we're going to go through this imaginary debate, will say something along the lines of, but actually, the phrase separation of church and state never occurs in the Constitution. And that's what Giordano's talking about here, is that the official wording in the Constitution is that there can't be a state religion established, which was then interpreted through precedent, and I think some of Jefferson's writings, into the phenomenon of separation of church and state.
So the Establishment Clause is in the First Amendment.
Right.
The government cannot establish a religion or endorse a religion.
Yes.
Also the name of the fourth Santa Claus sequel, Santa Claus, the Establishment Clause. Tim Allen arguing he has to fight in the front lines of the war on Christmas in that one. The North Pole is sued for endorsing a specific religious holiday.
By the ACLU. The ACLU is brought a charge against the North Pole and Santa's workshop.
I would love to see how the ACLU is portrayed in that movie. They're like the goblins from Harry Potter. My whole take here is that there legitimately was a war on Christmas in the 2000s. I just think that the term war is a very hysterical term for it. I think that a lot of people were changing their mindset about what does it mean to live in an increasingly diverse and secular society, and how should I feel about wishing someone a Merry Christmas?
Yes.
And I think that there was a lot of discussion and consideration for whether or not we should be doing this. But I should note that nobody was compelled to say Happy Holidays. There was no one being sent to a work camp for saying Merry Christmas. That is all completely imagined.
It's the worst kind of war. It's a war with no deaths, no prisoners, no fines, no coercion, no compulsion, just hurt feelings. Truly
Right.
the worst kind of war.
Yeah. And the book that I'll draw from, this John Gibson book, he'll go out and find 4 or 5 cases in the country where people were compelled to do something more on Christmas related. And they're very funny examples, as we'll get to.
I would also add, in terms of the debates and discussions that were happening, I think part of what's so frustrating about people talking about a war on Christmas is that there are 2 debates happening simultaneously. And you could imagine a graph. On the x-axis, on the horizontal, we have traditional and secular. Christmas is obviously increasingly secularized. November 1st rolls around, and you're going to start hearing the I want a hippopotamus for Christmas song, or grandma got run over by a reindeer. But you're not going to hear the religious ones. Christmas trees, presents, jingle bells, secular Christmas music. This clearly is happening. Christmas is being secularized. And that's something that some of these right-wingers are unhappy about. The lawn signs keep the Christ in Christmas. There's also a second debate that you can imagine on the y-axis, which is how much Christmas do we want in public life? And I think the opposing sides of the war on Christmas issue are, we're fine with lots of Christmas in public life as long as it's the secular Christmas. And the other side of the debate is, fuck you, it's a religious holiday and it needs to be everywhere. Those are the 2 camps with the 2 twin conversations that are happening.
Right. I should note, too, that the ACLU was pretty annoying. This is the thing I never heard on The Daily Show. It's always so easy to dunk on these people, but there is a Bill Maher guy who sued a school board. Parents were sent home a calendar of the school year, and every month had a different label. And this one school's calendar said Christmas month for the month of December. And this Bill Maher motherfucker sued the school to have them change it to holiday month. And as a result, in the United States, law is set up in such a way where if you lose the court case, you have to pay your opponent's legal fees. And so the school had to pay their opponent's legal fees. And every other school saw this case and got terrified of having some kind of liability. And a lot of them did choose to remove some of the religious imagery from the school. And so we'll talk about this more later. But I don't want to pretend that there wasn't a shift in behavior during the 2000s. We'll get into more to what extent was any of this compelled or just done on the basis of fear. Mm-hmm. And this is 2004. Does the ACLU have nothing better to do? The year that the Abu Ghraib scandal comes out, they're like suing a school board to get a sent home calendar to remove the word Christmas.
Yeah, if you want to learn about other civil liberties that were being violated during the 2000s, listen to any of our episodes on geopolitics. And I'm sure it'll come up.
And so, just lastly, the conservatives are so hysterical about this. They think that if you hum I Saw Mommy Kissing Santa Claus, you will be taken to the black site. And the whole thing is largely a straw man. There's so many cases in this book where someone is saying they're canceling Christmas. And it's never really defined who they is.
You got to throw 3 parentheses around those days.
Yeah, we have an entire theme section dedicated to that. So anyway, we'll see this throughout our story today. But just to roadmap a little bit, we're going to go through the history of the war on Christmas. We'll talk about John Gibson's book, The War on Christmas, and then we'll get into some of this religious opposition to secularization. In 1959, the John Birch Society, they were convinced that communists were trying to take the Christ out of Christmas. And then a white nationalist blog, VDare, he coined this term in 2000. But then in 2004, it really blows up with Bill O'Reilly fixating his gaze onto it because there's a website that collects stories of war on Christmas things happening throughout the country into one place. And so John Gibson, this Fox News anchor, he goes around the country interviewing people who were involved in these war on Christmas situations.
The victims, Giordano, please. The victims
right. Victims of the war on Christmas.
The casualties.
And he's trying to find the hottest. He's trying to find the picture of the girl with the napalm, but for the war on Christmas.
I thought you were about to say he was trying to find the hottest baby Jesus in the nativity scene.
Based on what he looks like, he was also trying to do that. The Grinch is easier to look at than this man.
He looks like Gary Busey, truly.
He does, yeah. So the book, it's like a 300-page tome, which I did read. There's no audiobook for this one. The book opens up with an imagined scenario with no connection to reality at all. It's like, imagine a world where your son comes home and you ask him, how was Christmas celebration? And he's been indoctrinated to the point that he doesn't even know what the word Christmas means. But he keeps trying to talk your ear off about Kwanzaa and Hanukkah. And when you point to the Christmas tree in your house and you say, what is that? He says, oh, you mean the friendship tree?
Those are not dog whistles. Those are bull horns. The menorah and the Kwanzaa candles.
This is the dystopian vision of the world that we're headed towards. If we don't get right, we need to end the war on Christmas. We need to have overwhelming force.
Shock and awe.
Shock and awe.
Well, Giordano, it's winter. It's the Christmas season. What's a better time for a slippery slope fallacy? Am I right?
Oh, hey-o. Boing. Sort of like Children of Men, John Gibson is borrowing from the real world to create a fictional dystopia. So even though this situation is completely imagined, this is a quote from the book sleeve. You can't say Merry Christmas at the office anymore. No more caroling in public. No more Santa Claus. No more wreaths. No more Christmas music. Even instrumental versions. No more school performances of A Christmas Carol. Even the colors red and green are under attack. This is from the book sleeve.
By whom?
It's a great question. This is one of my favorite parts, too. He says, part of the reason I wrote this book was my experience as a Fox News channel anchor during Christmas 2004. The channel's chairman, Roger Ailes, decided to put station identification breaks on air, which wished Fox viewers a Merry Christmas. You could almost hear the collective gasp from the public. Look, a television network is putting the words Merry Christmas on the air. The most disturbing letter I ever got during the whole Christmas season, Ailes told me, was a letter that said, "You must be a very brave man for wishing us Merry Christmas."
Oh my God.
Yes, wearing red in any public space is now as dangerous as wearing red in a Crip neighborhood. You will be immediately vaporized by the ACLU.
What's the body count of the ACLU?
I want someone to make like an Equilibrium 2, but it's like a Christmas version where he doesn't take his anti-Christmas antidepressants one day and starts to celebrate in small ways at his house, but is turned in by his son. The subtitle of the book is How the Liberal Plot to Ban Christmas is Worse Than You Thought. The stakes are high, higher than you thought they would be. So I just wanted to point out that paragraph, the last one that I just read, because this is a straw man. The idea that you could almost hear the collective gasp of the audience, and you're like, who? I don't know, who's gasping?
How are you hearing the gasp of the public when you're in the Fox News building? Surely, if it was such a brave act, wouldn't they have received a bunch of hate mail?
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think they did.
It's just this imagined bravery. So another quote from Mr. John Gibson. I am in my late 50s, and the expression of Christmas I enjoyed as a boy would today be considered shocking and offensive. He's looking at a photograph of his hometown, Redding, California, and he's noting some of the details. The giant face of Santa Claus hangs on a garland of evergreen twisted with strings of lights that stretches down the entire street. Every year, the town would cut down a tall tree to have a Christmas tree in the center square. And then he says, oddly, considering the climate of political correctness these days, they still do these things in Redding, California.
Great! So there's no problem.
I thought you said it would be shocking and offensive.
Yeah.
Yeah, the first point is, if Redding was still like my childhood, it would be considered shocking and offensive. And then he goes on to say, Redding still does all of these things. So it's like, what's your point here, buddy?
I think he might have the memento disease.
You just said that it was shocking and offensive, but they're still doing it, and there's no public outcry. So what's going on? He does note that today's tree is surrounded by an asphalt expanse next to the mall, and it has diminished the experience significantly.
Is he a big urbanist? Does he believe in banning parking minimums? Is he a YIMBY? Does he believe in zoning reform?
It's so funny that the one thing that has actually diminished his childhood Christmas thing is car-dependent infrastructure. Yeah. But that can't be highlighted at all. It just has to be like an imagined scenario in which his hometown's Christmas celebrations are no longer the same.
Yes, which is not happening.
Literally the only difference is that it's being ruined by cars, but that won't be addressed at all, obviously.
Yep.
He opens the book with a 20-page thesis, and he ends it with this paragraph here. While it is true that there is no nationwide ban on Santa Claus, garlands, Christmas wreaths, jingle bells, and Christmas trees, and that the Supreme Court has never ruled that they are forbidden, even on public land, in public buildings, or public schools, and while it is also true that local communities in local government offices, these are the new symbols of separation of church and state, we have moved on from objections to the clearly religious symbol of a nativity scene, and now every one of these formerly secular symbols of Christmas has been banned, forbidden, and disallowed by some satrap of local officialdom. Some school superintendent, city manager, or superior court judge has some executive fiat somewhere in the country.
Citation fucking needed.
Yeah, well, we're about to get to them, man. He's got the hottest 4 or 5 examples he could find in the country of exactly what he's describing. But yeah, he ends this introduction with, "Yes, Virginia, there is a war on Christmas. And the coming chapters, you will learn that it's much worse than you thought."
Okay, I look forward to it. I'm on the edge of my seat.
First example, this is the hottest one, right? You got to come out hot with your best stuff. He tells the story of a school in Covington, Georgia that had to remove Christmas from the calendar, the one that I described earlier. Some poor school administrator has to send home a school calendar every year to the children, and the December month has Christmas in it. So the ACLU sends the Grinch down to Covington. And this is a guy who, I looked him up. He was a couple years out of law school and he wanted to make a name for himself. So he went and fought this, which nobody else would bother to do because you're literally the Grinch. His name is Craig Goodmark. And I looked this guy up on LinkedIn and his professional website today. No mention of any association with the ACLU or working to ban the word Christmas from a school calendar. So I think he's probably pretty embarrassed that he was willing to spend his time doing this in 2004. And what you find in all 4 or 5 of these stories that he cherry picks is that there are very specific reasons why this school had to limit Christian imagery. And it's usually because of the people involved. And in this case, it was because the school administrator, a guy who could not be interviewed because he died in a motorcycle accident between the publishing of this book and the incident. For one, the school had flip-flopped. They changed from Christmas to holiday and then back to Christmas. And because they were changing it back, they actually had to provide a reason. You don't need a reason if it's already Christmas, but the fact they had to change it back meant they had to provide a reason. And the reason he provided on the record was that America is a Christian nation. The judge himself said, and the ACLU guy, Craig Goodbury or whatever. Well, I'll just call him Bill Maher for the purposes of this story.
All ACLU members are Bill Maher. Every single one of them.
Said, I can't rule with this guy because he said his reason was America was a Christian nation. These are the stakes. If the person who's in charge of making the decision is dumb enough to make a weird fascist statement, you might have to lose the Christmas imagery in your school calendar. I don't know that the stakes are particularly high in the war on Christmas. At least the war on drugs has some life or death situations.
Millions of deaths.
Yeah.
The ACLU, we keep calling it Bill Maher because they do really seem like an organization, given my limited knowledge of them, that believe in that stupid idea that if everyone is yelling at you, then you must be doing something right. This is something that the dumbest people online will say, like smug-ass Bill Maher or stupid Elon Musk. If everyone hates you, you got to be doing something right. So I know this is an organization that in the 1970s, in like Skokie, Illinois or something, fought for the right of white supremacist Nazis to march in the streets. And now they're going after Christmas in public schools. There is no cause too annoying that they will not pick up. I don't know if they've ever done anything effective. I've never heard of a story about like, man, the ACLU really saved our CLs. They really got it. They really protected us.
I mean, maybe during like the 60s or something.
Yeah.
It seems like they've taken the boomer arc of just becoming as annoying as possible as they've gotten older. And so this story is important because what it did was it established a situation in which, like I said, if you lose a legal case, you have to cover your opponent's legal fees. And so the school had to cover the ACLU's legal fees. And as a result, all of these school boards around the country started flipping out like fucking cooped chickens about the idea of having an outstanding liability. And he interviews a few of these school administrators around the country who are just do-gooders, and they're like, I have a fiduciary responsibility to avoid liabilities for the school board. And so rather than learning about why this specific case couldn't include a nativity scene and looking into what the Supreme Court rulings were, they just decide to ban Christmas imagery outright or suggest that they do so.
Yeah, better safe than sorry.
Exactly. And this is where a lot of the war on Christmas perception comes from, is when you follow the threads of a lot of these stories and you figure out, okay, who's actually banning Christmas here? Who is the big evil person?
It appears to be the ACLU.
Well, it's not even the ACLU, though. It's the phantom of the ACLU.
Yes.
You talk to the school administrator, and they're a Christmas person. They're a Christian, I guess is how you say that.
Yeah.
And they go, oh, it's a liability. The school doesn't have money to pay the legal fees. And so they just change it, even though they would win the case. Just the hint of the big bad ACLU being around the corner.
They're too worried about the ghost of Christmas lawsuits past and not the ghost of Christmas lawsuits future.
And so, like I said, this book has 4 stories of the most egregious massacres of the war on Christmas.
The Me Lies, the Little Big Horns, the Thermopolies of the war on Christmas.
So we move on to a library in Seattle that got rid of its Christmas trees. And there was so much public outcry that they immediately had to put the tree back. These are the stakes throughout the stories. It's like, okay, there's some anarchist library in Seattle that is like, we don't want Christian imagery in the library. And in every case he looks at, there's a public outcry and it goes back to the way it was. And so to the extent that this is a war, the war is Grenada. Like that's the level of danger that Christmas is in. Okay, you found 4 examples where Edgelord Library got rid of Christmas trees, immediately had to rescind it. A school had to change its calendar. The University of Oregon decided to no longer have Christmas trees on campus, but only because there was a big backlash against the forestry industry. They thought that it was wasteful to take these beautiful trees and use them for a month and then throw them away. But to John Gibson, this is an attack on America as a Christian nation.
Dude, what could be more Christian than waste itself? Don't you remember that line in the Bible when Jesus was like, consumption, it's good for you?
Yeah, a university, a library, a school. Aren't these all places that conservatives want to just get rid of entirely?
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of how I feel about Drag Queen Story Hour and what others have said more intelligently than me, but the way the right wing talks about Drag Queen Story Hour makes you think that there is a drag queen talking in every single public library at all times, when in reality there was a Drag Queen Story Hour in Sacramento, California, and those government employees of the state of California probably dug it, but it seems as if the outcry over certain books or Drag Queen Story Hour might be a Trojan horse just to get rid of public libraries entirely. John Gibson probably is a fanatic for the war on Christmas, but why does Fox News run with the war on Christmas so much outside of outrage and views is that it probably does align with some longer term goals of defunding certain things.
Doing this whole episode made me realize, that Chapo point, people are fundamentally the same. You have these hysterical people who find out that a library in Seattle isn't celebrating Christmas and losing their minds. Just being hysterical with the cancel culture and freaking out that, oh, these university students don't want Christmas trees on their campus. This means I'm under attack.
Yep.
The last story is from Plano, Texas, where one of the parents got banned from having their kids give out candy canes, but only because they had a history of trying to spread their evangelical church to other students in the school for like years, trying to give away tickets to church services. At first, the goodie bags were full of candy canes that said Jesus is the reason for the season. And it's like, yeah, you're at a public school. You're not allowed to evangelize at a public school. Sorry. I know that you think it's harmless, but some people get annoyed by that. I don't mean to buy your logic, but you'd probably have a problem with someone preaching Islam at the public school. God knows what your reaction would be if your student came home and said, I'm interested in Islam. Or if your child came home and said, hey, could I know some more about the Quran?
Yeah. The whole compromise by those stupid founding fathers around the separation of church and state was just a compromise between different kinds of Protestants. You had the Puritans up in New England and you had Baptists out in the South, and they were terrified of each other. So this was the compromise position that they just had. You don't want to get told what to do. You don't get to tell someone else what to do in the field of religion.
So yeah, those are the 4 most egregious cases of Christmas being under attack in the United States. The Christmas tree at the University of Oregon, the library, and will someone please think of the calendar? So as you can see, the stakes are incredibly high.
I'm sure this war produced a lot of post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm sure there was a lot of people with shell shock from the war on Christmas.
So I just want to finish out our John Gibson discussion here, who's the Fox News anchor, by talking a little bit about anti-Semitism.
Oh, does he not support the state of Israel? Because that's what that means now, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. No. It's so funny the way that he words things, because reading this book, it becomes very clear to you that who he thinks the ACLU is a very specific group of people, specifically college-educated Jews. This is the image he paints.
His imagined villain is Meadow Soprano's boyfriend in college.
Noah Tenenbaum, He does it in this way where it's like, I know what you're thinking. It's a Jew who did this.
It was a Jewish ACLU member.
And it's like, well, I actually wasn't thinking that until you said that. To what extent are you just saying that? Here's a passage from the book that did exactly this. Almost everywhere, a school district is limiting Christmas carols that kids can sing or hear. Almost everywhere, a school district has disinvited Santa Claus, and that even the colors red and green are forbidden. Whose fault is this? No, it's not just liberal Jews.
The word just there.
The word just is doing so much work because it implies that they are there. But there's apostates involved as well. Mm-hmm. He does go out of his way to say that it's not Muslims. I will mention that. He says that Muslims love Christmas. But yeah, he definitely paints this picture over and over again of the ACLU being very educated Jewish people and Christian apostates. And it's always in that manner of being like, now, some people like to jump to conclusions, but it's not just liberal Jews who are doing this. And it's like, well, I literally wasn't thinking about the religion of these people at all until you brought it up. This idea that the Jews specifically are trying to cancel Christmas goes back a long time, I found out. In the 1920s, Henry Ford of Ford had a publishing company that released a 4-set of essays penned by Ford and a handful of aides called The International Jew, the World's Foremost Problem. And these essays had run previously in Ford's The Dearborn Independent newspaper. This is a quote from those publications. The whole record of the Jewish opposition to Christmas shows the venom and directness of their attack, wrote the automaker and notorious anti-Semite Henry Ford in 1921. This is at least a 100-year-old story that we've been telling. It's the Jews who are trying to cancel Christmas. You know, I've mentioned that my grandparents were peasants from Italy. They didn't have a great understanding of the world, but they thought that Christmas was a holiday invented by the Jews.
Hey, man, they're not wrong. They're not wrong.
They're not wrong, but they are wrong in the way that they thought that sentence was true. So yeah, that's my wrap up of this John Gibson book. He paints this absolutely dystopian vision of the world where you're not allowed to hum a Christmas carol. And then he goes out and finds examples where this is true. And every single time he provides you with an example, because yeah, like you said, citation fucking needed, buddy, if you're going to make all these claims that don't align with reality at all. Mm-hmm. Then the 4 or 5 examples he does include are situations where either A, the stakes are way lower than what he's describing, or B, the people who are personally involved in these stories are being annoying. And so people have to rule against them. I'm glad that in a country of 350 million, he went out and found the 3 or 4 most egregious examples of the war on Christmas. And this is what they are.
Yeah, and it is all wrapped up in xenophobia. Without getting totally lib-brained about it, there is this association in these people's heads that white people celebrate Christmas and non-whites don't. They celebrate Kwanzaa or Hanukkah, like we saw in John Gibson's writing. So I feel like in the 2000s, as America is getting more diverse, not only ethnically diverse, but also more and more people are kind of coming out of the irreligious closet. That share of the pie chart of people who tick the box none under their religion is slowly growing. A huge part of this anxiety is trying to work out the feelings towards this. I do see a little bit of white reaction in the obsession with the war on Christmas. I'm sorry, that was a very 2016 take of me, but
yeah. And the other takeaway here, I think, is this point about the ACLU that they were being fucking Bill Maher, Richard Dawkins guys when they sued the school board, because it's like, do you really care about this? you're going to set off a chain reaction of hysteria throughout the country over nonsense, over nothing, basically. And also, yeah, maybe we shouldn't have nativity scenes in public schools because you can do Santa Claus. I'm not saying you can't do anything Christmas related. And just about the Constitution. The country has to operate according to its laws. We're sort of bound by this Constitution that does say that we can't endorse a specific religion. And this is where John Gibson says the Constitution may say that, but there's also common sense involved. It's just so funny because where's that approach when it comes to the Second Amendment? You know?
Shall not be infringed, Giordano. It's right there in the words.
But what about common sense? Like, I don't know, like the common sense seems to come into play a lot more for the things that he wants.
You know what I call it? I call it uncommon sense because not enough people have it.
So fucking true, dude.
So true.
I did read another book published in the 2000s on the war on Christmas. It is called The War on Christmas, Battles in Faith, Tradition, and Religious Expression. And this is actually just is by a kook, not by a Fox News anchor. This is by like a mechanical engineer. His name is Bodie Hodge.
Oh, hell yeah. Bodie? Like the guy in Point Break?
Yeah, and he's just some asshole who published a book. And his big thing is that too much of our Christmas celebration is not related to what actually happened in the Bible. So he makes a big deal about the 3 wise men. That's sacrilegious to put them in the manger because they didn't show up till months later. So we got to get rid of the 3 wise men. 2, he also had an issue with the manger itself. He points out that in the Bible, the manger is called a...
Cataloma?
Cataluma, yes. Which he points out is more like a guest room where the animals would have been let in at night if it was cold. It's not a space that's specifically for animals. It's one that animals would have used if it was cold. And so he's like, there's no manger, there's no wise men. In fact, Joseph was likely staying at one of his family members' house because Joseph, if you remember, had traveled to Bethlehem for a census. The house of David had to register in Bethlehem. And so he's staying with a fellow House of David member. This religious nutter, he only mentions this in one sentence, but he mentions that Joseph and Mary were likely staying in the animal guest room because they were unmarried and everyone else would have looked down upon someone having a child out of wedlock. When Christians talk about wanting to keep the Christ in Christmas and get rid of Santa Claus and elves, I never see them also being like, oh, well, we also got to keep in mind that this is an unwed couple whose family had turned their backs on them.
Yeah, let's talk quickly about the Holy Family for a second. I once took a course in the New Testament. Ever wonder why Joseph kind of disappears from the New Testament narrative? That's because he probably died early on in Jesus' life, probably because he was much, much, much older than Mary was. That was part of ancient marrying practices, was men in their 40s marrying teenage girls. I don't see that reflected a lot in those manger scenes. Or you have the fact that the New Testament claims that Jesus has a brother named James. James, brother of Christ. And now it's going to depend on your denomination of Christianity to figure out who this James fellow is. Most Protestants think that James is a child of a former marriage of Joseph. If there's one thing social conservatives love, it's a blended family, and the Holy Family is one of them. Oh my God, I'm sounding like such a fucking lib right now. Like, did you know Jesus was actually a refugee or whatever? But
it does sound like something Toby would say in The West Wing.
Yeah.
Or Josh would say in The West Wing, yeah.
The Catholics believe that Mary remained a virgin, so Jesus, when he says James, brother of Christ, is more in the like, yo, my brother, sense of the word. But yeah, this religious guy who's talking about how we need to only use the Bible is avoiding a lot of discrete elements around the Holy Family.
I thought Joseph went out for a pack of frankincense and never came back. That's why he doesn't appear in the flash forward scenes. So a lot of this guy's argument is based in the idea that the Bible says that there was a census happening in 3 BCE. And also that there was a culling of the children who had been born during a 2-year period. And this is kind of why they were hiding out after.
Yes, the killing of the innocents.
Also, I guess just before we move on, I should mention that the Bible seems to imply that Joseph sold the 3 wise men's gifts shortly after.
Hell yeah.
They got re-gifted the frankincense and myrrh, in a way. I think the Bible claims that he sold the gifts to avoid the culling so they could sort of travel away from Herod. And you were telling me that there's no historical record of either a census or the killing of innocents under Herod.
Correct, yes. Double check my sources on this, but there's definitely no record of the killing of the innocents. That I can say uncontroversially. It appears in no sources other than the New Testament. We have other sources from the period. This king killing all of the infants in a couple towns is the sort of thing that probably would have made it into the sources. What the author author of that gospel is doing is trying to draw a parallel between Jesus, the founder of this new religion, and Moses, the founder of Judaism, right? Because he gets the law from God. And when Moses leads the Israelites out of Egypt, you have the death of the firstborn as one of the Egyptian plagues. So it's like a literary device to draw this parallel between the two of them. The killing of the innocents did not happen. The date that we have for the birth of Christ is not right. Again, that prof that I had in this New Testament Greek course that I took, he spent a whole bunch of his career trying to prove that Jesus was not born in 4 BCE, but actually 6 BCE. I'm like, you motherfucker, do you want us to shift all of our dates by 2 years?
Oh man, academia is so funny.
Yeah. And yeah, it's like the Bible says in the days when Quirinius was governor of Syria and when Augustus was emperor. And so those two things are for sure historically accurate. Augustus obviously was emperor, and there was a Quirinius governor of Syria, but no record of a census under that governor.
And I bring all this up just to make the point that we talked about the permutations of the x-axis and the y-axis of Christmas in public and Christmas as religious holiday. And for these people, they're in the axis that Christmas should be explicitly religious. Mm-hmm. And I bring all this up to point out that even if Christmas is just a religious holiday, this is fraught with the details that you want as well, right? The idea that they're in a manger and there's 3 wise men and a shooting star, almost all of that is not in the Bible. Mm-hmm. They don't like that, oh, the Santa Claus and elves, those aren't in the Bible. It's like, well, neither are the fucking wise men, and you're changing the story so that they're not having a child out of wedlock in their family's guest home.
Yeah, it's always been in flux. It's always been shifting sand, this thing that we call Christmas. Also, one last thing I want to say before we zoom out. When the war on Christmas hits the world of the corporation, you may remember a big brouhaha over the Starbucks red cup or what have you. Back on this idea of how public do we want Christmas, these right-wingers want Christmas to be a part of commerce and not the holiday season. And sometimes they kind of tip their hands about what they really care about, where Bill O'Reilly says corporate America should be thankful for Jesus' birthday because they'd make a lot less money if it weren't for Christmas. This is what they really do care about in a lot of ways. When you imagine what kind of Christmas that they want, I don't think it necessarily even does involve a quiet, domestic, family value style Christmas. It needs to be one where you're outside shopping. It also reminds me of, we see it nowadays where all of a sudden the right wingers hate billionaires. They only hate billionaires now because billionaires are these tech guys who until very, very recently were all very liberal. They don't have any problem with Jeff Bezos being a multi-billionaire. They have a problem where when you log on to Amazon during the month of June, the front page is going to show you LGBTQ authors. That just turns their fucking blood. Nothing about the labor practices of Amazon or like chewing up the competition or wealth inequality. That they're fine with. But it's this ticky-tacky cultural bullshit on top of consumption patterns.
So we've sort of summarized the war on Christmas in the 2000s and got to, okay, well, what were the front lines of the war on Christmas? What was this hysteria and where was it coming from? What events happened between 2000 and 2009 that created this hysteria? Now, given that it's the Christmas season, Ben and I thought that we might get into a little Christmas history.
Yeah, exactly. I found this book called The Battle for Christmas. And it traces the fact that there has always been a battle around what this holiday is, what it means, and how we will celebrate it. This has always been up for debate and interpretation. And I found it really interesting. And honestly, some parts of it turn me into a bit of a return guy, as we shall see. We need to return to certain traditions.
We want to do this section just to point out that the war on Christmas, that's the 2000s iteration of it. But Christmas has always been an ever-changing holiday. The version of Christmas that John Gibson wants is he wants Christmas to stay as it was in the 1950s. But the Christmas of the 1850s was actually radically different than the Christmas of the 1950s.
Mm-hmm. Or actually, you'll see, by the 1850s, a lot of that dye had cats. You got to go back to like the 1750s, as we shall see. But, okay, so flashback in time with me to the early modern period of Europe. We're talking 1500 to 1800. So either before or just at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Early modern Christmas is wild, and it's all wrapped up in the agricultural calendar, because most people lived on farms and did agriculture. So when the winter rolls around, there's no more work to be done on the farm until springtime. The harvest is done. No planting yet. It's when you have the most food in your stores. It's when the booze that you have been fermenting is ready for drinking. And the temperatures are cold enough that you can slaughter an animal and the meat will keep for longer in the cold. So poor people probably would only eat fresh meat during the winter months. Other times of the year, they'd had to eat salted or preserved meat or whatever. So what this means is that the Christmas season was a time of feasting and revelry and drunkenness and carnival. And it was this time of the year where social roles could be inverted. And the poor peasants and serfs and agricultural workers could make demands of their quote-unquote social betters. There was a role reversal where they could come, they could sing a little song, and demand of them the best food in the house. And they would have to be feasted. It was a time of misrule and carnival. So if you squint, you can kind of see some of our traditions, right? Gift giving, even if it's under threat of violence, or caroling. But the caroling has an edge. I found some lyrics in the book. We've come here to claim our right, and if you don't open up your door, we will lay you flat upon the floor. So it's a time when you get to threaten your fucking landlord.
Yeah, David Graeber mentioned that in his Dawn of Everything book. During these carnival seasons, you have this flipping of social roles. They're playing with that, right? So imagine peasants showing up at their landlord's house to demand gifts or to flip the social powers.
Yeah, so that's the recognizable bit. Some of this is unrecognizable, like mumming. You ever heard of mumming, folks?
I have, yeah, the Mummers Parade in Philadelphia.
Yeah, mumming is like a form of cross-dressing back then. Listen to our Coyote Ugly episode for more on the carnivalesque. But we have a flipping of gender roles. And the historian who wrote this book says, when you pore over the census data from colonial New England, there is a baby bump 8 to 9 months after Christmas. And you can also see babies being born like 7 months into wedlock. So people are sucking and fucking at the Christmas time. Then you have this tradition called wassailing, and this is like the more aggressive form of caroling, where poor folks would go into the houses of landlords and rich people and just demand gifts. Like a more aggressive trick-or-treating. There's a story from this guy, John Burge, who's writing in his diary. It says, just before 2 o'clock in the morning, my house was assaulted by some night walkers, or rather, blockheads. These wassailers demanded entry. They assaulted the house, very bold, by knocking and pounding as if they meant to force the house. When Burge refuses to let them in, the intruders shattered one of the window panes all to slivers. They may have even broken in and carried something away, foodstuffs and clothing. Burge closes his diary entry with the line, I cannot see why it was much better than burglary. And I read that, I'm like, return! Make Christmas the purge. And it's all wrapped up in play. I'm going to hit you with one more example because this one's hilarious in that it involves amateur theater from a group called the Antics. This is a mix of mumming and wassailing. The Antics, that's the name of their gang, would demand entry or force themselves into the houses of Boston's well-to-do, respectable citizens on Christmas and perform a play that no one asked for while demanding gifts of money in return. So this is a quote from that book that I'll read in full because it made me laugh. They interviewed a guy in the 18th century, like a really old guy, about what the 17th century was like, and these are his recollections. I have seen them at my father's, when his assembled friends were at cards, take possession of a table, seat themselves on rich furniture, and proceed to handle the cards, to the great annoyance of the company. The only way to get rid of them was to give them money and listen patiently to a foolish dialogue between 2 or more of them. One of them would cry out, ladies and gentlemen sitting by the fire, put your hands in your pockets and give us our desire. When this was done and they had received some money, a kind of acting took place. One fellow was knocked down and lay sprawling on the carpet, while another bellowed out, see, there he lies, but ere he dies, a doctor must be had. He calls for a doctor who soon appears and enacts a part so well that the wounded man revives. So this seems profoundly annoying. Just people breaking into your houses, putting on amateur theater, pretending to play cards with you. But it gets worse. After those dudes finally leave after getting their money, immediately a second group of antics burst in.
Yo, Christmas used to be so awesome.
Yeah, Christmas used to be fucking lit, dude.
Yeah, it used to be based.
Yeah.
Imagine Bill O'Reilly talking about the war on Christmas, but he's trying to return to this. And it's like, it used to be, when I was a kid during Christmas, that poor people would come into your house and perform a play that you didn't ask for and then demand pay for the play. It's not like that anymore because of you-know-who. I could get on board with him coming out on the war on this Christmas because, as we'll see, there was an attempt made to get rid of this practice.
Yes, we're going to see 2 attempts. One failed, one successful. So the main point, early modern Christmas was this public celebration, or maybe even civic, and it was not at all domestic. It was in no ways commercial. No gifts were ever purchased at a store. The gifts were food that you had grown or cooked or made yourself. It was not at all focused on children and the family. The gift giving was from higher social classes down to lower social classes. It was a class-based holiday.
But not from parents to children.
No.
Oh, okay.
So we move on to the Puritans, the hat buckle guys. Hat buckles, shoe buckles, buckles everywhere. They're wound a little too tight, probably because of all the buckles. And they realized what any wiener will tell you, that the Bible says nothing about Jesus' birthday. We don't know when it was. They realized that it is a pagan holiday. The early Christians put it around the Roman Saturnalia. They realized that all of these traditions are wrapped up in the harvest, very earth mothery, cyclical. We don't like that. We're good Puritans. We're going to purify the church. And they attempted to ban Christmas. They actually made it so that in the almanacs, you could not write Christmas on December 25th. They did the thing, Giordano, that the ACLU was suing about.
That's awesome.
So they preached against the excesses of the holiday. They insist that it's a regular, normal day. They don't even do church on Christmas unless it happens to fall on a Sunday. They try and make people go back to work. And Christmas only thrives on the margins of Puritan society. They try to stamp this thing out, but they can't because it's popular. It's great. There isn't any work to do in December on a farm. And in the 1600s, they really try and crack it down. In the 1700s, they try and co-opt it for God. They start to say it is a religious holiday and we will do mass on Christmas Day and we will celebrate it, but within reason. And they try and reappropriate it, but they just can't make that old riotous Christmas go away. They can't quite stamp this damn thing out. So now, what does successfully change riotous Christmas? Well, we got to flash forward to the 1820s in New York City, baby, number one. So this contemporary American Christmas that's kind of recognizable to us, gifts to presents, family time at home, Santa Claus, this is pretty much invented whole cloth by 2 New Yorkers. There's a guy named John Pintard and his contemporary named Clement Clark Cole, who's the guy who wrote The Night Before Christmas, and they are responsible for a whole bunch of American holidays.
The important point to pay attention to here is that these guys changed the practice of Christmas celebration on purpose because of their class.
Yep.
They had a vested class interest in moving away from this civic celebration of Christmas outside of the home, from landlord to peasant.
Yes, exactly. These guys have this weird social class because we're deep in the 1820s, where the old landed gentry aristocracy is starting to be displaced by the rising capitalist class, the guys who own factories and shit, the bourgeoisie, as they would be called. And these guys, because they're from this old money, they are viciously opposed to universal male suffrage. They're opposed to the urban poor and Jeffersonian democracy. They're opposed to the abolitionist movement. And they're also opposed to capitalism. So they have this idea, this warm, fuzzy idea of this paternalistic order where the nice landlord would give stuff to his dependents.
The specific type of rich guy that this is, they own land. Mm-hmm. That's their type of rich.
Correct.
Specifically, you said one of these guys, his family owned Chelsea.
Yes. Cole, the guy who wrote 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, had a massive estate, which he named Chelsea and later became the neighborhood of Chelsea in New York City.
He founded Le Bain. He founded the club almost 200 years ago.
And so now they're looking around and the social relations are changing because New York City is changing. Now the poor aren't peasants on a farm, but they're urban working poor. Some of them are foreign, from the exotic Emerald Isle of Ireland. And these guys, because they're not tied to land, some of them are expected to continue working through the wintertime. Some of them get laid off. And there isn't some paternalistic nice landlord to take care of you. The owner of the mill that's powered by water has laid you off because the river froze and there's no work for you to do. Enjoy your winter, motherfucker. And so these riots are getting a little bit riotier, and there isn't this interpersonal bond that there used to be. And this is freaking these guys out, because this Christmas ruckus is looking like an urban riot. Quoting that book again, riotous disorder, racial violence, and jolly foolery for neighbors and audiences existed side by side. Customary Christmas license combined with seasonal unemployment made the winter holiday a noisy, drunken, threatening period in the eyes of the respectable. How are we going to get a handle on this thing?
Yeah, it seems like this could be a problem for the landed gentry.
And it never became like Union Drive at Christmas time, from what I understand. It never took on this explicitly political bent, but these motherfuckers were firing off guns like Yosemite Sam as they went on their Christmas parades, right? And like laying off firecrackers. And there's one story where they burned down a black church, which is very depressing because it's also wrapped up in racial violence. So, John Pintard, the first of these two guys, this guy fucking loved holidays. This guy, he's either fully or partially responsible for creating the following American holidays: 4th of July, President's Day, Columbus Day, and also kind of Christmas.
He's like the Blizzard in the 2000s of holiday makers.
Yes. He's one of the first guys to bring St. Nicholas into the Christmas tradition. He doesn't quite get his branding right. St. Nicholas, he's still got the bishop's hat. He has sweets in one hand and a cane for beatings in the other. It was kind of like a V1 of what Santa Claus was going to be. And the little text that he wrote, it was kind of meant to be like a final day of judgment and revelation, but with kid gloves. For Santa Claus, or wasn't called that yet, for St. Nicholas. And the big thing about these guys is that they worship the Dutch era of New York, which existed for like 50 years in the 1600s. But that is the ideal in their mind, because this is agricultural society where there was peace between landlord and serf. And neither of these guys are actually Dutch themselves, but they appropriate Dutch culture. And that's why they love St. Nicholas. Even though they're kind of inventing it brand new, they claim that it's from the early Dutch tradition. And apparently in 19th century New York, if you wanted to invent something brand spanking new, you would say that it's Dutch. And that would be your panacea for where did this come from. We have a newspaper article from the first ever baseball game. The first baseball game that ever got played. They described it as this storied game from New Amsterdam. Just wild how they worship old shit. Anyways, John Pintard, the holiday head, is the one who brings in St. Nicholas, which reorients the holiday around children, around rewarding and punishing children. His buddy, Clement Clark Cole, writes The Night Before Christmas. I think the formal title is A Visit from St. Nicholas. So he is an anti-abolitionist, northern, slave-owning country gentleman, like we said, owner of all of Chelsea. He inherited so much land and wealth, he never had to take a job. When he did take a job, he took a token professorship in his 40s at a seminary constructed on land that he had donated to the seminary. An obscenely rich guy. And we all know the fucking 'Twas the Night Before Christmas poem. This was a pretty revolutionary work. Yeah, I know it's trite and lame and for children, but it does a few things. It was much reprinted everywhere, and it changes Christmas from an exchange between the classes to an exchange between generations. Now it's a practical, simple ritual that a household can do, and significantly, a household within its own class, with no going outside of class boundaries. You stay at home and you give presents to your children. And there's a little sleight of hand, because within a nuclear family, children are the lowest on the hierarchy. So you maintain a little bit of that up to down movement,
Right.
but there's been a bait and switch. And there's two significant things that the poem does. Number one, it inverts the traditional class relations, because the poem says Santa looks like a peddler. He's got a short pipe. Short pipes were for the working classes. The upper classes smoked long pipes, as the book explained to me. So here you have a visit from a working class person, but he's not making demands of you. In fact, he's giving you something. It totally neuters and sands down the edges of this tradition of visits. Some other working class elements of St. Nicholas: he's quite literally small. He's explicitly compared to a peddler. And instead of loudly and raucously demanding gifts, he quietly gives them. Think about how serene that poem is.
Not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse, right? This is the genteel vision of Christmas. Not a creature was stirring. There was no one in my card game room doing a play. Not even a mouse.
Yes, even the mice were quiet and respectful. And yeah, he's this grateful, non-threatening dependent in a lot of ways. You don't owe him something, he owes you something. Now the poem is about children. And it's a quiet, serene, domestic scene. There is no threat to the rich classes. And Nissenbaum sees his poem as releasing rich folks from fear, like their fear of the lower classes, as well as from any pressure of guilt that they might feel. Because they're not doing what their grandparents used to do in this changing world. Actually, they like it.
One reason why I love this story that Ben just told is that the Christmas as we understand it and is now popular from China to Europe was invented in New York City in like the 1820s.
Yep.
The idea of Santa Claus giving you gifts and fucking reindeer and all that. I don't know how I made it 30 plus years without ever finding that out. That's such an amazing American detail that the thing that all these people are fighting for is something that was cooked up 200 years ago in New York.
In capitalist, market-oriented New York, yes.
Yeah, and then specifically cooked up by genteel people to get out of the bubbling up of social issues that would inevitably happen around the holidays because they laid people off.
Yeah. So we move on to this final period. Full disclosure, I didn't finish the book. I got through most of it. From the 1830s to the 1850s, we have two parallel Christmases happening. Both of these are competing. There was still the loud, drunken revelry, but that Christmas was constantly on the back foot. So in 1839, the New York Herald is writing things like this. Quote, "Let all avoid taverns and grog shops for a few days at least, and spend their money at home. In that way, men would be sure to make glad upon one day the domestic hearth, the virtuous wife, the innocent, smiling, merry-hearted children, and the blessed mother. Christmas is the most hallowed season of the whole year." Contrast what I just read to what we see in the papers in the 1850s. There are Christmas gangs in the streets. The Tribune writes that the gangs of youths were roaming the streets at Christmas, making trouble wherever they went. They had names like the Short Boys, the Swill Boys, the Rock Boys, Old Maid Boys, and the Holy Christs, and other bands of midnight prowlers who should have been in state prison long ago. So you have these two parallel traditions where the media is trying to relegate one style of Christmas as legitimate and good, and the other style of Christmas as bad, even though it is how it used to be celebrated for a very long time. This happens kind of gradually, that these two Christmas diverge. The one that's domestic and child-centered eventually got fashioned into real Christmas. The cool Christmas, with drunkenness and threats of violence, got totally redefined as crime. We even see this in how the papers report it, where we have the Christmas stories, which is about rich people staying home, then we have the crime stories, which is about the poor people going on their Christmas parades. Because rich people in a market capitalist economy where social bonds are anonymous now, especially in a dense urban environment like New York City, rich people started to find the old style Christmas threatening. And so they had to create new domestic Christmas. And whole industries start to arise around Christmas gifts really quickly. Like, it's crazy to think about. You have an entire industry around children's gift toys that didn't exist like 40 years ago because presents were just food that you gave to your agricultural workers. There was no such thing as a Christmas gift for a child until like the 1840s or whatever. You can see the transformation from one Christmas into the other Christmas in these texts. So one of the most popular children's books would show going to a parade, going to the theater, show all this misrule happening, but you get to experience it as a reader at home, right? It's giving you a little taste of what it used to be, but totally reorienting it towards home. Last thing on my little book report on the Battle for Christmas, listen to this little list of children's books and games. It made me laugh because it sounds like 2000s indie rock coming up with band names. The Oracles of Fortune, The Game of Heroes, The Game of Characteristics, Shakespeare in a New Dress, Robinson Crusoe and His Man Friday, The Strife of Genius, The Game of Cup and Ball, The Pickwick Game, The Mansion of Happiness, The Game of Pope and Pagan, Dr. Busby's Cards, Master Rodbury and His Pupil, The Devil on Sticks.
We should have thrown like Broken Bells in there, just like an actual indie rock band from the 2000s.
Yeah, like Fleet Foxes. Bella Fleck and the Flecktones. But what is especially wild to me is that if you think of a lot of the anxieties that we have around Christmas, is it too commercial? Are we making children too materialistic? I have anxiety about getting a loved one a gift. How can I express my relationship through gift giving, through something as crass and transactional? All of these ideas crop up as early as like the 1850s in people's writing. Along with Christmas came a Christmas anxiety, and one of the most common things, poring over all this social history primary documents that Stephen Nissenbaum collected, everybody says Christmas used to be better. Like the Christmas of my youth was better.
Right.
At least with these people, there was a very drastic change that they could witness, and that might be true.
Yeah, and next time your grandparents tell you that Christmas was a holiday created by the Jews, you can actually point out that it was created by the fake Dutch. I mean, this is my take here. It's not something I've read in any of these books, but my feelings are that there's a cognitive dissonance for these people, including myself or anyone who has vaguely liberal values when you're living in an increasingly secularized and diverse world. What should I be doing? I want to be a good person. Should I be saying Merry Christmas? Should I be saying Happy Holidays? And I think we had to have that conversation for 10 years, and this is the social movement that came out of it. But now I see this as largely being settled. I think most people are pretty happy with Christmas. I don't think anyone's really worried about getting in trouble at work for saying Merry Christmas.
I don't know, man. I feel like this is still going on. I feel like there are still op-eds that come out. I don't think it's quite as keyed up as the 2000s were, but like I said, Tucker Carlson talked about the hate crime against the Christmas tree back in like 2018, 2019. Donald Trump has that spiel about how we're going to say Merry Christmas again.
Yeah, that's true. We actually mentioned the war on Christmas, I think, in our Daily Show episode, because Jon Stewart would always do a segment on it. There was a very lib smugness about it, which was always to be, look at these fucking moron yokels. They are reacting hysterically, clearly. But why are they reacting so hysterically? And it's because no one ever mentions the ACLU suing the school board, or all of the weak-kneed school administrators around the country who are just cowering in fear of this civil liberties organization, needlessly. The people he interviews, they seem to think that the ACLU is as well-funded as NATO or something. They believe that there are hundreds of thousands of Jewish lawyers waiting to sue them. We never really get to have a conversation about why is there all this anxiety around the war on Christmas? Why does this anxiety exist? And I think the reason is just that most people are genuinely interested in being a good person. And in this decade, they were thinking about, well, am I a good person if I wish Merry Christmas to someone who doesn't celebrate Christmas? We were moving through the motions of trying to figure that out for ourselves. And it resulted in some people reacting hysterically and being like, how could it ever be a bad thing? But I just think that a lot more people are more relaxed here because most people have come to the conclusion that Christmas is a secular holiday. People from all around the world can celebrate the idea of Santa Claus and the elves and the sleigh. And maybe we don't include the nativity scene. We can put Santa Claus on the Starbucks cup, but not necessarily the manger, which we've also proven is a fabrication in itself. The echo in the culture here is that I guess you sort of disagree that we've moved on.
Yeah, a little bit. I feel like you still hear about it. It's just the list of right-wing grievances has become much longer. I think maybe the reason that we don't hear about it so much is that they got so much other stuff that they're mad about. You know, now they've moved on to critical race theory and other shit in schools and DEI in HR departments, which I think is a much richer target for them in that you can actually point to HR departments and choices that they might make in terms of workshops on white fragility. You can point to that as something that is happening, and they can get a lot more red meat for the Fox News viewers than they ever could out of the quote-unquote war on Christmas, because like we've said, everything was so fucking ticky-tacky. The list of right-wing culture grievances has grown exponentially that the war on Christmas, while still raging, is just less of a priority. Like the North African front in World War II.
Yeah, the war in Afghanistan in like 2019. You know, like we're doing an occupation of Christmas, but who knows if we'll ever be able to get out of this quagmire. I watched a very funny clip of Sam Cedar of the Majority Report, who went on CNN in 2004 or 5 to debate a family values guy about the war on Christmas. And he had a really funny bit, which I'll put in here.
Well, listen, you know, as far as the war on Christmas goes, I feel like we should be waging a war on Christmas. I mean, I believe that Christmas, it's almost proven that Christmas has nuclear weapons, can be an imminent threat to this country, that they have operative ties with terrorists, to the operational ties between Santa Claus and Al-Qaeda.
I don't think that exists. Bob?
Well, we have
Help
intelligence.
me out here.
We have intelligence.
You
have intelligence.
You have intel. And where
Yeah.
exactly does your intel come from?
Well, we have tortured an elf. And that's it's actually how we got the same information from al-Libi. That's exactly the same way the Bush administration got this info about the operational ties between Al-Qaeda and Saddam.
Yeah, that's our episode on the War on Christmas. I hope you enjoyed our holiday episode, getting you back to, what it was like trying to celebrate Christmas in 2004, where the FBI was knocking on your door if your neighbors reported you for feeling any kind of Yule tide.
Dude, if you donned any gay apparel, it's over, pal.
It's funny, too, because the Bush government sent out happy holiday cards in 2004, which caused a lot of this backlash to really get amplified. And that one's just funny because it's like, well, this is the Bush administration. It's not Obama the Antichrist doing it. This is your guy. This is the evangelical in the White House. Mm-hmm. And so it's almost like they're doing a psyop, right? Like the Bush administration being like, yeah, sorry, we were forced to do this. But it's like, well, by who? By who?
By whom? And to what end?
Whoville? That's my question. Every time someone is like, there's a war on Christmas, they won't let us sing Jingle Bells. They won't let us wear red and green. It's like, who is doing this? Mm-hmm. And every time we get to the bottom of it, in the actual stories from the front, it's always someone who's worried about liability. America is such a litigious country that I feel like so many of their problems come from fear of liability, right? Mm-hmm. Whenever you see food being thrown away and you're like, well, why can't we just give that to people who are hungry or food banks or the homeless? You always hear, well, it's a liability. We have to throw away these donuts. It could make someone sick and they could sue us for millions of dollars.
Yeah, the true American pastime. Not baseball, but suing each other in court.
And you even said that might not be true about giving the...
Yeah. I remember watching something on YouTube that said that whole business about how they have to throw out as soon as it's expired. And then not only throw it out, but pour bleach on it so that people don't dumpster dive.
Oh my God, that's so sick.
Yeah. It has nothing to do with actual liability. Because I don't think you could be like, I ate your garbage food and got sick. Like, I don't think you'd have a case. It just has to do with making scarcity. If they were giving away food for free, fewer people would be buying it, is the capitalist logic.
In conclusion, capitalism is the perfect system. And we need to be operating at peak efficiency to win the war on Christmas. When the war on Christmas started, they thought it would be over soon. They said, we'll be home by Christmas. Perfect. And yet, here we are 20 years later, and, we're still raging on. But Ben and I, we're not going to mince words. We will say to anyone listening, Merry Christmas.
I celebrate Snowflake Day, the fictional holiday from the Clone High episode. So I will say, Jolly Snowflake Day. Please enjoy your lamb taco. I hope Snowflake Jake brings you spices upon spices. And we will go out to JFK singing, away in a taco, no spice for my lamb.
I should clarify that when I am wishing the audience a Merry Christmas, I'm not referring to the nativity scene. I am referring to the holiday in which you put on a unasked for play in your landlord's home.
Bring it back.
Okay, so thank you for joining us. We had a lot of fun with this one.
It was good to try on a Christmas episode. Don't listen to the Christmas curve.
Yeah, not one of our most listened to episodes, that's for sure. We're going to do a mailbag episode one of these days. If you would ever be interested in a mailbag episode, let us know. We'd love to get into like a miscellaneous episode at some point. All right, well, enjoy your time in the darkest month of the year. That is hopefully at least ameliorated by some sense of festive tradition. For me, that's what Christmas is about, is like, we're entering the coldest and darkest time of the year, and that sucks, but I at least get this month where I can participate in a festive tradition that I enjoy.
Look at the pretty lights. Every winter holiday around this time has lights. Hanukkah's got lights. Christmas has got lights. I think there's one of the Hindu ones has a bunch of, like Diwali, right? That's a light one. Enjoy the lights, and please get back to the early modern Christmas feasting and gorging. At least, if you're not going to break into your landlord's house and make demands of him, at least feast upon the plenty. It's something they can't take away from us. Eat as many jalapeno poppers as your air fryer will make you. I beg of you. Your peasant ancestors demanded of you. Merry Christmas, happy holidays. Ciao, ciao.
Yes, and if you want to provide us with a Christmas gift, leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Like, this is our Christmas shoes situation, Sir, I need an Apple review. There's not much time for Ben. We need...
Oh, no. Listeners, you heard it. He threatened me.
No, I mean. So, yeah, anyway, see you later.
As always, thank you so much for listening. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. Ciao, ciao.
Bye.
It's JFK sings the Snowflake Day hits.
Away in a taco, no spice for my lamb. Snowflake, 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 I made you out of snow. Jerky balls, jerky balls, jerky beef jerky. Jerky balls, tasty balls. Balls of meat, jerked so sweet.
Merry Christmas! Generous!